Joining me now is Democratic Congressman Adam Schiff, the chair of the Intelligence Committee. Mr. Chairman, thank you very much for being with us. Know you've been busy. What's different this morning? We heard from Robert Mueller yesterday before Judiciary and your committee, so what's changed?
Well, I think for the first time, the American people got to hear from the man who did the investigation himself. His work was not filtered by Bill Barr, who misrepresented it. It wasn't filtered by the president, who certainly misrepresents it on a daily basis. But this is the guy who spent the last 2 years of his life, has served the country his entire life, talking about that work and laying out how unethical, unpatriotic, criminal these actions are, to willingly accept help from a foreign government to obstruct justice. So I think hearing that from the man who did the work was powerful.
The words you just used, those were your words, though. Those were not necessarily his words. His words were typically yes, no, correct. If it's in the report, I agree with it.
That's correct. To use that metaphor. Yes, that's true. He was a reluctant witness. We understood from the very moment he said he wasn't going to come in, that he wanted the 10 minutes to be a statement that, he was going to be a very recalcitrant witness, and he was. But nonetheless, getting him to acknowledge the false claims of exoneration by the president, getting him to describe just how troubling the president's conduct was, and even though he was reluctant, as you can imagine, to provide the soundbite, the president is immoral, the president is unpatriotic, that was the essence of what he had to say. And that has power. Now, whether it will change the equation or not, I don't know. I was, as you might recall, very circumspect about how much attitudes would change as a result of really any hearing. If after the president's racist comments of the last 2 weeks, if they haven't moved people, I wasn't sure that anything Bob Mueller could say would. But nonetheless, I think it's important to get all these facts out to the public.
What happened at that Democratic caucus meeting that we understand was a robust discussion that concerned what to do with impeachment?
Well, I don't discuss the contents of our caucus meetings, but look, we have members who feel, passionately about this issue. I think we all do. We're all wrestling with it. I think those that are ready to pull the trigger and say, let's begin the impeachment, feel their hand is even stronger after this hearing. I tried an impeachment case in the Senate about 10 years ago, a corrupt judge. We convicted him, so I have some sense of what's necessary to make that case. I have very little illusion about getting a conviction in the Senate, but there's another jury that I am more concerned about, and that's the jury of the American people. And I want to be sure if we head down that road that we have the case to make the American people.
Are you closer today than yesterday?
Well, I do think that Robert Mueller lived up to expectations, at least mine. He stuck to his report. That's what he said he was going to do. So I didn't go into the hearing expecting new facts.
What do you say about all the critics who say, oh, his performance was halting? He had trouble with the facts. He had trouble with the language. The president's been very critical of how he seemed. Rudy Giuliani. Is there any merit to that argument?
No. Yes, the halting nature of his answers made questioning him a challenge. As a former prosecutor, it meant that, you take each witness as they come, and it meant it wasn't easy to get him to tell a narrative. But what's more important than the style we saw of the witness is the substance, and the substance, I think, was just devastating.
The word you hear is optics. You're saying it wasn't about the optics.
For me, it's not about the optics. For me, it's about what does this say about the president's conduct? And what does this say about what Congress ought to do about that?
What does it say about the president's conduct to you?
Unethical, unpatriotic, wrong, and criminal.
All of those things, especially the last one, criminal, meet the definition by my reading, and I'm not saying I agree with your assessment, but of what is impeachable.
I think that's unquestionably the case, but that's what I think. Can we make the case to the country? And does the country benefit going through an impeachment if it's going to be unsuccessful? And we know in the Senate, at least, it would be unsuccessful. So I'm not there yet, but I'm keeping an open mind, and I may get there.
Let me read you what Dan Balls of the Washington Post wrote about yesterday. The barriers to impeachment have always made it a challenging option, giving that Republican control of the Senate to the frustration of some Democrats. But other Democrats were advocating long before Mueller wrapped up his investigation that the party's focus should be on the 2020 election rather than impeachment. That now is the only realistic course for settling the question of the future of Trump's presidency. Dan Balls writing there, 2020 is the answer, not impeachment.
2020 is unquestionably the only way he gets removed from office, so we can never lose sight of that. I have tried to put the political question out of my head. That is, does an impeachment help us in 2020 or does it hurt us politically? Because I don't think it's the right question to ask. But we do need to be realistic, and that is the only way he's leaving office, at least at this point, is by being voted out. And I think our efforts need to be made in every respect to make sure we turn out our people. But on the policy question, what's the best thing, what's the right thing for the country? Should we put the country through an impeachment? I haven't been convinced yet that we should. And going through that kind of momentous and disruptive experience for the country, I think, is not something we go into lightly.
Some house cleaning notes about yesterday. Representative Krishnamurthy had an exchange with Robert Mueller where the former special counsel seemed to indicate there was an ongoing FBI counterintelligence investigation still into aspects of Russia. Do you know what he's talking about?
I do. And I mean, this is one of the things that we have been pressing to get information from the FBI. And we're getting some information, although it is halting. And that is, this began as a counterintelligence investigation. Mueller said basically when he picked it up, he turned it into a criminal case, and the counterintelligence information was sent to the headquarters. We still don't know the full results of those counterintelligence leads. Were they followed up? Were some of them dropped? Were there findings made? Are there people still serving in the administration that shouldn't have a security clearance? Are there steps we need to do to protect the country? That's what we're trying to find out.
Why hasn't Corey Lewandowski been called to testify before? I would assume it would be the House Judiciary Committee. That's not your problem directly, but as a member of the caucus, it is. He has no claim to privilege.
No, he doesn't. And actually, we had him testify in the Intel Committee, and he essentially said, I'm not going to answer those questions. And we said, are you claiming privilege? And he said, no, I'm essentially not going to do it because the White House doesn't want me to do it. And the Republicans were just fine with that. And that was, of course, the flaw with how the GOP ran their investigation. I think he should be called. He needs to be brought in. I think he's a very material witness on the obstruction of justice. So I would hope and expect that that's a priority.
There are Democrats who look and say, why haven't you done that already? There are Democratic activists frustrated with the pace of all of this.
Look, I'm frustrated with the pace of it. We are subpoenaing witnesses and testimony. We are having to go to court to enforce those subpoenas. That takes time. That's the whole reason why the Trump administration is obstructing this way. But I do think we need to understand that if we declare that we are now in the midst of an impeachment, it doesn't bring McGahn in tomorrow. We still have to go to court to force his testimony. It's not like that turns on some magic switch and all of a sudden Corey Lewandowski says, OK, when do I show up? We're still going to have to enforce this because the president has embarked on this maximal obstruction campaign of his, unprecedented history. We are winning in the courts, but yes, it is frustrating. The president obstructed justice, and now he is obstructing Congress.
You throw these phrases around like the president obstructed justice, and then at the same time, you say, I'm not ready for an impeachment inquiry yet. And you see there's a contradiction there. Some people look at that and see a contradiction.
Well, look, I would be delighted if we had a prospect of removing him through impeachment, but we don't. And the most attractive thing to me about an impeachment is that it's among the strongest forms of censure that we have. But the same is true of an acquittal for the president. That's the strongest form of exoneration for him. And that stays my hand.
Devin Nunes, who is the ranking member, who was the chair of the Intelligence Committee, you've worked with for some time. There are rumors that the current director of National Intelligence, Dan Coats, could be on the way out, and that one of the possible replacements would be Congressman Nunes. Would he be an appropriate choice to take over as director of national intelligence?
Well, I see why I wouldn't be eager to comment on that. But I will say this. I have tremendous respect for Dan Coats. You want someone in that position who was willing to speak truth to power, who is a good manager of people. I think Dan Coats has done an admirable job of both, and I hope he continues in that office.
Would Devin Nunes